Hello and welcome to Cooking the Books with Heather. Today we're having kind of a lazy day. It was supposed to snow for the third weekend in a row, and it did, but just a little bit. But we're going to stay at home, so I'm in my jammies, and I'm going to be making Bannocks at Carfax Close from the Outlander Kitchen Cookbook by Teresa Carle-Sanders. I've always been interested to try these Bannocks. I've never had them before. These ones are a lot like American biscuits, from what I can tell. They're going to be a little bit lighter. I think the ones that they would have had in the 1700s probably would be a little more dense. There is a version of those in this book. Haven't made them yet, but that is on my to-do list. So we'll be able to compare them, I guess. So this is a more modernized recipe. So the first thing I'm going to do is grind some oats. I have my oats already measured out in here. I measured them before instead of after. I'm not sure if that's correct or not. I couldn't find any information about whether she prefers you to grind them and then measure or measure and then grind, but it's easier for me to just measure them and then grind them because then I don't have a little bit potentially left over that I may not use, or that I have to store differently, whatever. So these are just plain old-fashioned rolled oats, and we're going for a coarse grind. And she says I think 3 or 4 times for a coarse grind, but I find that's pulsing it 3 or 4 times. I find that it takes me more, so we'll see. It's going to be loud. Probably won't see it all, but I'll tell you how many pulses it took when we're done. All right, so this is after 3, and to me, it does not look very different, and I would not call this very ground at all. When she says coarsely ground, she says there should be a few of the sort of unground pieces in with the rest, but not completely flour-like. So let's see. Okay. So that's like 10, and I'm going to call this coarsely ground. It is, it definitely looks different, and hopefully you'll be able to see that from here. It doesn't look entirely like oatmeal does before you grind it, but it looks like there's some in there. So we're going to go with that. That was 10. I'm going to take this off and move this out of the way and get all my other ingredients. So in this bowl, I have my all-purpose flour already measured, and I'm just going to dump my oats in here so I can get rid of another thing off my counter. So I've got the rest of my ingredients here, and I'm going to need to get another bowl, whatever. So we're going to add some baking powder that I've already measured here. We have a little bit of just plain white granulated sugar. Today's going to be a little bit sweet, and some kosher salt. And we're going to mix this up. She doesn't say to use a whisk, but I like to whisk it because it sort of gets it mixed up well, and it breaks up any lumps since I didn't sift it. There we go. So now I need another bowl to stir these together. Okay, so then we've got some wet ingredients. This is just some yogurt, plain yogurt. I could not find regular plain yogurt except in very large amounts in my grocery store. So this is a Greek yogurt. I'm sure it's fine. It might be a little bit thicker, so we'll see. We'll see how it goes. And some whole milk. And I'm just going to mix these together. I'm going to use my whisk because I already had it out. And why not? It's pretty good. The next thing we need to do is an interesting technique. We're going to be grating in some butter. So let me go get that. So I've put my stick of butter in the freezer just so that it maybe won't melt on me so fast. Just for a little while, not any great length of time. And I've got more than I need here, just to give me a little bit to hang on to so I don't hurt myself. So I'm just gonna sort of estimate that I'm grading the amount for the recipe in here. And this I wanted, you definitely want a larger grate than, like, not a microplane. You don't want that here. Okay, I'm gonna call that the amount the recipe calls for. And now I'm gonna try and get all of this off of here without melting it. And so now we're just going to sort of mix this into our dry ingredients, and then we just add our wet ingredients here and stir it together to make a slightly sticky dough. And she does say to stir this with a wooden spoon, so that should be okay. Next, we're going to actually put this out and sort of roll it out, pat it together. So I need to clean off my work surface and put some flour down. Okay, so we're going to turn it out onto our floured counter. And I'm going to try to sort of push this together into one ball of dough. She says to sprinkle it with more flour. Since I turned it over, it's kind of okay that way, but I'm going to put a little bit more on the bottom. She says, knead the dough lightly 5 or 6 times, working in just enough additional flour so that the dough is no longer sticky. Kind of unusual for biscuits. You usually try not to work the dough very much because you want them to be light and flaky. And now we're going to pat or roll. I'm going to go with patting. I don't really love to roll. Into an 8 by 8 inch square, about half an inch thick. And now we're just going to cut into 12 rectangles. So that is interesting. For this, I'm going to use my pizza cutter. All right. Go in half this way, and then in half again. Mine look much smaller than hers, but oh well. And then let's get this out of my way before I knock it over. And then in thirds. Okay. I didn't do a great job with that, but they'll be fine. So we're going to put these on our prepared baking pan. I'm going to wash my hands a little bit. Before all this, I put a sheet of parchment paper on my baking pan, and we're going to arrange them on the prepared baking pan, I assume, with space between them. We'll see how that works. All right, so my oven is preheated to 400 degrees, and it has a rack at the upper middle position, and we're going to bake them until they're just golden, 12 to 15 minutes. So I'm going to bake these off, and I will let you know how long it took when we're done, and I'll show you what they look like and tell you what we think in just a minute. On this episode of Cooking the Books with Heather, you watched me make Bannocks at Carfax Close from Teresa Carle-Sanders' Outlander Kitchen Cookbook. So these are basically like a biscuit. These are a more modernized version of the Bannocks that you might see them make in the 1700s from the Outlander series of books. So they're a little bit lighter because they do have a leavening agent, and they have yogurt in them to also provide a little tanginess and react a little bit with that leavening. And they were actually really good. They were better than I expected. They were a little hearty. I wouldn't say they were dense, but they just kind of felt more substantial than a Southern United States biscuit does. And I think because of the oatmeal, they lasted longer too. So we had a few left over and ate them over the course of the next few days, just seeing how they held up. And they definitely held up better than biscuits do. So I can see why something like this was sort of a traveling food or something that they would take with them and be able to have over a period of time. I think I maybe didn't pat them quite as thin as she did, so mine were maybe a little smaller um, than hers as far as width and anyway, as far as those directions are, but kind of were a little bit taller. Um, they did rise really well, and I did need a couple of extra minutes for them to bake appropriately, which might have been because mine weren't quite as thin as she says to roll or pat them out to. So I just patted them out. So um, yeah, so we really enjoyed them, and I would definitely make these again. There was nothing really difficult about the recipe, but you do need to have um, a food processor or a grinder of some sort to grind up the oats to make them a little bit smaller, not quite flour, but a coarser meal, somewhere between flour and oats. So um, that is a necessity for these. I don't think they would be quite the same if you just put in whole oats. So um, yeah, if you enjoyed watching me make this, please give me a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and come back and watch me make something else next week.